So does anybody have any question to ask to Mickael or Chris?
Has brackets.
I have a question. Now we see a lot of Android objects, not smartphone, but smartwatch, glasses,
microwave. I saw a microwave.
Microwaves, yes, fridge, whatever.
I love the fridges because nobody's ever going to buy one of those fridges. You know, who buys an Android fridge?
Yes, it's crazy.
But oh, look, my milk is bad. I think that's what that smell was. You know, you don't need a microwave.
So the problem is, okay, you have Android on all phones, but what about the objects? How about fragmentation? Because all of these objects are completely different.
Yes.
A watch is very limited. In terms
so
of
we're not shipping a watch.
No, but you have.
But people are using
a company, Whim.
Yes.
About that.
Yeah.
So and Samsung will release a watch.
Yeah, they've been talking about.
Yes, they have been talking about that. So this is a great concern about the Internet of Objects and Google. And what is an Android object?
What is an Android object? You know, it's funny. So if you look at Google Glass, you know, the cyborg thing, it's actually running a stripped down version of Android. It's running the Surface Flinger. It's running a bunch of those things. So they go to the cards metaphor. You know, I think I'm kind of not worried about this. So I have to admit, I have a very positive viewpoint of fragmentation that most people don't share and find annoying in me. I think that what's going to happen with watches and glass and alternative devices like that, are going to be more like what happened with tablets. So before Android really shipped as a tablet operating system, people used it for tablets anyway. So Arcos did, a bunch of Chinese manufacturers did, and people would say, oh, they're fragmenting. You've never had a device with that resolution before. That's going to be terrible. And it's like, you know what? A lot of people like those devices. And what happened was, as people shipped them, I think Google learned a lot and said, oh, it looks like that's working. We should do that, you know? We should make our stuff friendly for that form factor or that screen resolution or that device parameters, right? So is tablets really just a big phone, or is there something really different about them, you know? And you know, if you look at like Honeycomb, and one of the reasons we were so late on releasing that and really pushed it off to Ice Cream Sandwich was we were like, what are we doing here? We don't know. Let's ship it, you know? And it feels like that sometimes. And the thing is, there's a human cost to developers sometimes because of this attitude, right? They say, they don't really know what they're doing. It's like, yeah, sometimes we don't. And sometimes the industry doesn't know what it's doing. And so we're all going to experiment. And what it means is that if you pick the wrong experiment to tie your wagon to, your development wagon to, you might be wasting some time as a developer. So then it comes back to, is that a problem, right? Sometimes it is, because people will sometimes invest like their mortgage type time, right? And that's really heartbreaking. But overall, I think it's a really good thing, because while some of us will waste our time, all of us won't. And if we can, as a company, Google as a company, when we open source these frameworks, we're ostensibly giving some time back when we do that, right? We're saying, listen, we know that people waste time on these fragments, on learning these alternative technologies. And maybe what we can do to ameliorate this is make sure that when we learn something from this kind of process, that it's open source and available to everybody. So yeah, so I don't think there is an answer. And so I used to say, and I don't say anymore, but I love saying it, so I'm going to say it. I used to say, fragmentation isn't a problem when you're winning, right? Fragmentation's a loser problem, right? Because, you know, when people are accusing Android of fragmentation, they're saying, why am I not getting a consistent experience enough so that I'm making money from it, right? Because while Android's been fragmenting, so is Apple, so is everything else. They're like, oh, it's just a longer display, but it's the same display. It's like, no, that's fragmentation. They're like, it's more processors, but it's the same to you. And it's like, you know, actually it's different, you know? Oh, we changed the form factor, it's thinner, and there's higher definition, higher DPI displays, but it's the same. It's like, no, it's very, very different. But it doesn't matter if you ship enough of these things to make the developers money enough from adding another screen res or adding some other feature. So I guess I don't worry about fragmentation because I feel like Android's finally winning in tablets, for instance, and it's obviously doing quite well in phones. So it makes it worth the while, worth the extra trouble of dealing with a higher screen res or a different screen res or accommodating some flow of gadgets or whatever. So this is the thing about watches and glass and the rest. The volumes aren't there yet. So unless you're the kind of person who has time to experiment that might be wasted, maybe those aren't for you yet. But they're sure fun. So maybe you should find a way of targeting all of them at once and being that genius that says, oh, that's how you do it, you know? Because honestly, when I look at watches and glass and the rest, I think, wow, that's a UI problem that's very hard to get past. So anyway, I don't know if you, I mean, you know.
I agree with you when you say that fragmentation is it's a developer issue, not a user issue. So when you get, I mean, no user will complain about fragmentation.
Well, I mean, think about it. Going from CS4 to CS5 to CS6, it's like there was real changes in the interface, but people wanted content-aware stretching of their images. They wanted it bad. They would have taken anything from you guys to get that, and they did, right? So you're like, finally our chance. We can rearrange all the widgets again, and it's like, okay. But it was worth it for the users because they really wanted content-aware fill and all the rest. You know, so.
I guess the biggest challenge for us is more the exchanges between the software, you know, how they communicate, how you can share an object. So it's another issue, but we're still working on it too.
I don't pretend to understand anything but Photoshop. That's how I deal with it.
That's the best.
My daughter understands Photoshop and Illustrator and French much better than I do. Yeah, so she has this subscription. So,
Good.
Another question?
We can just keep talking.
Yeah. About Orange, you know, we all have a story about Orange.
Yeah, really? Is it like your flag carrier? You're proud of Orange?
We're so proud of our stories.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is it now a different company?
It's a company apart.
Yeah. What's it called now?
No. So it used to be France Telecom.
Right, France Telecom.
And now it's Orange.
Oh, now it's Orange. Okay. So what's SNF?
SNF? No idea.
Or SRF? SRF?
SMCF?
SFR. I know.
Or ISFR. Yeah.
SFR?
It's the competitor.
A competitor.
Yeah.
That's where I have a SIM card.
So, why some popular applications like Google Maps or Gmail are not open source?
Yes, that's a very good question. Yeah. So, as you know, Android goes to a certain level, and then there's some stuff that's not open sourced. Right? So, Gmail, Maps, what?
Calendar.
Calendar. Yeah. That really should be open source. Not that it's bad. It's lovely. So some things are open source and some things aren't, and that's the answer. It's not a good answer. So in the case of Maps, we still license a lot of imagery from other people, and so we can't actually open source it for various reasons that are really annoying. You know, in the case of Gmail and some of the other applications, they're not open source either.
Is it sometimes? Do you think it's for business reasons, or sometimes it's just the legacy? You know, like, we used to have at Adobe applications, and like Flash, for instance.
Yeah.
Like every year we had this meeting. Should we open source Flash? Like every year, you know, for 15 years.
Yeah.
And
15 years.
And at some point,
it's that old, really?
And it's 1996. I think.
You'd never think so.
Yeah. And at some point, engineers would say, okay, we can open source it, but just to comment the code, etc., it will take another 15 years.
No. So it's really, so I don't like cleanliness answers for that. I mean,
we had some licensing issue, like Google Apps.
So the real problem with Flash and why GNU Flash, the Ganache things, were never very satisfying for users. I mean, that's a lot of reasons why we actually don't open source the YouTube app, is that the codecs are so heavily litigated and so expensively licensed. If we had a world where everyone was using WebM, that'd be great, because then we can have a discussion really about open sourcing like the YouTube app and the rest. But yeah, no, it's really challenging. And anywhere where you touch content providers like Play, so Play handles apps, it handles all this other stuff, but it also handles movies and music and all the rest. Yeah. Anytime you talk to Hollywood, you end up having a hard time being open about that. So, so that's pretty frustrating. And I have I don't have the juice, the ability, the skill, the smarts, whatever, to get past that problem. Now, in the Gmail case, the reasoning is one that I agree with reluctantly. Not that I have the power to force things in this case, but I sort of agree with the reasoning. If we're shipping software that uses APIs that aren't even really APIs, and they change incredibly fast, and they're not meant for public consumption, like the way that we handle contacts between the Gmail application and the contacts application and the back-end services. If we're not going to make those open APIs for any program to use, we sort of had the philosophy that our instantiations of those programs probably shouldn't be open sourced. We've done the opposite, where we actually open source the things that provide, for instance, the OTA capabilities of Android phones are done through a technology called in the case of Chrome OS, are done through Omaha, which is something we open sourced, and they got sued for it. But so that sometimes happens, but when the opposite hasn't happened, where the backend servers haven't been open sourced and the APIs haven't been open sourced, so that people could even create a stand-alike sort of backend for Gmail, we haven't open sourced those applications. So they become part of the whole Play package and the rest. So
I have a complimentary question from Ludovic, but he's very shy, so I will ask it for him.
That's fine. Ludovic,
about open sourcing Google Reader. What's the story?
About what? What about
Google Reader?
About shutting it down?
Yeah. And before maybe there were a kind of movement on the community to ask for open sourcing it.
Yeah. So the thing is, the Google Reader front-end code was easily replicatable using even tools we've released before. So we didn't open source that, and the back-end code was so deeply entwined with our back-ends that we couldn't open source it. So we tried to make sure the data was available through the Data Liberation Project, and I loved Reader. So it was sort of heartbreaking that we shut it down. So I sympathize. But yeah, I was unsuccessful in finding the resources to open source it. Because by then the team was like, oh, I guess we're finding another job inside the company. So they did. And we managed to get the data liberation story right, and that's sort of what mattered. And then people were able to consume that in the reader-like things and options out there. So sorry, it sucked. You know.
So how do you manage the knowledge in this case? You know, when you have a team of developers working on a Google Reader, for instance, for I don't know, maybe 10 years, and you decide to shut down, stop the project. Is there a team in charge of making sure that the project, sorry, not the people?
We don't shut down people, you know.
They're
okay.
At least the computer.
Yeah, the thing is, Google's like any large organization. You know, when you ask yourself, how does a decision like that get made? It's often a very complex answer. You know, it's usually a mix of people. You don't just point at one person and say, they killed Reader, get him. You know, and also, it's probably not right for me to go and name who made the final decision. But in a company like Google, when you look at a product and you say, okay, are we going to invest the time and energy in making this a product that we're really, really proud of and is really well integrated into the rest of what we're doing, or what? Are we going to let it death walk for a while? You know, is like a zombie? Are we going to keep people assigned to it? Because the thing is at Google, unfortunately or fortunately, depending on your perspective, our backends are constantly moving into different sort of offerings. Like, you know, when Reader launched, we hadn't even launched Spanner or Colossus or Megastore, or I think it was just when Bigtable had launched. So we're talking about technology they have to keep up with year on year. It's not like you can just ship this thing and forget about it. We have very little technology like that. So a small team at Google is actually fairly big. And to keep up with the changes of the back ends, you need not a serious number, but a good number of people who are just doing that, it seems. And you usually spread that kind of work across a larger team. And then so everyone gets to do fun things, and they also get to pay the little bit of tax of keeping things up to date. Okay. And then when you have a really small team in a not growing project, and you really are unlikely to make that a much bigger project or much bigger deal, the answer, the kindest answer in some ways, is to let it die, right? Let it be done. And if you can take the attitude, and some do, that if people like something like Reader enough, then other people will pop up to do that work. And it's been true, right? So by switching over from Reader so quickly, you killed the next Reader, but that's not fair either. So yeah, and at Google we're really trying to keep focus, right? And say, okay, when a project's done, it's done. When a product is no longer worth maintaining, or for some reason we decided it's no longer worth maintaining, no matter how I personally feel about it, then it's time to retire it. And I have to be honest with you, I didn't volunteer to take on the project, so it's as much my fault as anybody's, I guess. Although I don't think I could have saved Reader. Yeah, so I think of the projects I failed to save now, and it's like, yeah, I'm complicit, So sorry about Reader. It's my fault. Yeah. Get him.
Other questions?
I mean, you guys have killed a ton of software.
Oh yeah.
Just, all the time. Huge swaths of dead.
So hi guys. So I have a little questions, because you were talking about open source software and all, so that's nice. But what about open protocols?
Open protocols?
Yeah, like
which one's your favorite?
XMPP, for instance.
XMPP. Oh, I knew he was going to say that. So I hope as a company we revisit this question. When we made the big changeover for Google Talk and we stopped supporting XMPP, I didn't mind when we stopped supporting server-to-server communications. I have to admit this, because I saw what a pain in the butt it was to maintain it.
But server-to-server is still working.
Is it still working?
Yes.
It's great.
But not XMPP.
It's so hard. But
I
yeah,
can't connect using
yeah.
my XMPP client, but server-to-server is still working.
Oh, okay. So I'm screwed up. Yeah, no, the client's definitely not working, just for the record. All right.
Since last week.
Well, that's good. Hey, server's working. You could stand up a server and use that as your...
That's what I'm doing.
Oh, that's smart. Yeah, that's good. I used to run one of those things, too. So good. So we're done.
Obviously not.
Yeah, I didn't realize that was working. That's good, actually. I'm glad to hear it. Yeah, no, the move away from XMPP, I mean, I know the reasons why we moved away from the protocol, but the answer probably is we should have a properly documented protocol for accessing it and a proper API. Mm-hmm. So if XMPP stopped serving us well as a protocol, and it's not a great protocol,
sure.
it was good enough, And in fact, if you looked at the interface between Android and Google Talk, it was already an optimized sort of stream from the Hangouts app or whatever, Google Talk app. Because if you tried to communicate over mobile networks with XMPP, it takes up a lot of space. So we used an optimized form of it. So yeah, I think it might be like Reader, where they said, okay, we're spending a lot of time maintaining something. Or what it's more like, honestly? It's more like WebKit. So we went from WebKit to Blink, and immediately the WebKit team removed 1.5 million lines of code that were basically, if Chrome do this, if Safari do that, So there are times when sticking with old protocols is a bad choice, but the right choice is then to have an open protocol. So I'm really glad we're supporting the server-to-server stuff as a stopgap until we properly document it and have a good API for it. Now that said, I don't know about the plans for that, so I don't want to promise anything here, but it's something that I would hope we're doing. So.
Maybe I shouldn't have pointed out that it was working.
What?
No, maybe I shouldn't have pointed out that it was working.
No. Believe me, people know. It's just I forgot because I was on a plane yesterday.
Hi guys. Thanks for everything you've been sharing so far. My name is Pierre. And as far as I know, I can speak French. I use Photoshop, so can I meet your daughter sometimes?
She's 12!
That was my first question.
Oh!
She can use Photoshop at 12, well. Well,
yeah.
no,
yeah,
it
she
was
has a
just
tablet, the Intuos.
just a joke.
Yeah, I know.
My real question is about We are here something like between 10 and 15 people from Génie Mobile, which is a French startup dedicated only on Android. I'm just wondering, what are your thoughts on emulators? Is it a good tool? Do you think Google is doing enough on that? Not only on Android, but also on all the other objects like the Google Glasses, etc., etc.
So I have to be honest with you. I still haven't looked into Génie Mobile. One of your guys met me this morning. I honestly still have no idea what you do. So when you say emulators, do you mean emulating Android?
Yes, absolutely.
So emulating Android on a device, emulating Android on a desktop?
On a desktop.
On a desktop.
On top of Eclipse, I mean the classic one?
Yes, it can be connected to IDE, or it can be a desktop tool that you have to download, etc.
Good. That's my thoughts. I mean, I really don't know what to. What is your question exactly?
What are your thoughts on emulators? Have you ever tried the one that is on the SDK?
Yeah.
Do you think it's
slow
enough?
It's an emulator. It's slow. I mean, it's an emulator. Of course, it's slow.
You should try ours. It's quite faster.
Is it awesome?
It's not.
It's not awesome.
I'm just saying it's faster.
You should say it's awesome.
It's awesome.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, because I know that like OpenGL support in the emulator is weak in our case, and right?
Yeah, it is. Well,
I don't develop enough on it to be smart in this question. So I guess good. Yeah, you're gonna let me know how I can help, because one of the things you said that you guys were hitting were some API limits on emulators or something like that?
Yes, well, what I know about it is a lot of developers, because of the F word, tried to basically...
Facebook?
The F word, the fragmentation.
Oh, fragmentation.
Not the other one.
Facebook.
Basically, they are trying to test their application.
France?
That's the word.
Welcome to France. Yes. No, all right.
Because of fragmentation, I think an emulator can be very useful. And so far, I believe the one that is on the SDK is not good enough.
Okay.
So we try to provide something, and I was just wondering if Google is thinking about doing better on that, but maybe you don't have any clue. Or
I have no clue.
Okay. Fair enough.
I can find out.
Okay.
And then
please.
We'll meet again in 3 years. No.
Yeah, and in the meantime, try ours. It's called Génie Motion.
Okay. Cool.
Bye.
Not Génie Mobile. It's Génie Motion. That's very confusing. I'm easily startled.
I want to follow up on the previous question here about Open Protocol. It's more about all the Google Plus ecosystem. A lot of things that we told today, like Google Talk or the reader and things like that, all this shutdown or limitation come from the evolution of Google to going forward to Google Plus and Google Plus services. But when we look at Google Plus and other things, Google Plus, Hangout, they tend all to be closed, to not even have API
G Plus has a very limited API. It's
yes,
very limited.
and that is a concern for a lot of people, even for content producer. And at the beginning, the idea was that okay, Google Plus was really new, so we didn't have time to create the API or things like that. But it started to be...
No, that was never the argument, actually. So the argument around Google Plus APIs being limited was they were keeping it limited because they were not sure where they would take the product and the API that would go along with it. So they've always had APIs that are pretty simple, that they could see being able to support for the life of the product. And because of that, they're actually extremely conservative with any sort of write APIs or even aggressive read APIs. So I would say that if an open API is very important to you, G Plus is not the product for you because that's not what they're going to do. They're extremely conservative when it comes to that kind of thing. So
the thing is more also for Hangout. You see, maybe Google Talk, XMP was not the better things to communicate, but a lot of people use that to do very good things.
Yeah.
And if we look at what Hangout is becoming today, it's more a replacement for Skype, but it doesn't look like it will become more open than Skype. But we can think that there is a lot of things that we can do with that if it's open.
So there is an API around Hangouts that I've seen worked on, and it's pretty interesting. And I think it's even, some of that's public by now. If not, you've seen some of the experiments without knowing it.
There is something to control start and hangout or something like that?
Yeah, no, there's more than that coming though. So I know that Hangouts is seeing a lot of attention from the API communities, from the API people at Google. So I would look forward to that. Hangouts are very tied into Google's backends. So, you know, you have all those little pictures along the bottom. There are all these streams going back and forth in our data centers. And I think that keeps them from wanting to open it up more to random clients. So, you know, what I think happens in response to these kinds of things, though, is a little different. It doesn't keep people on Hangouts, although they'll use it. It basically makes people think, well, what can I offer that is open that people can use? And so they'll use WebRTC and they'll use, you know, standard XMPP servers, and they'll do their video communications that way. And that's a reasonable response to us not opening up the protocol and opening up the system. So what I try to do is just make sure that some of those fundamental technologies are out there, and even that we fund some of them, right, or release some of them ourselves in the case of WebRTC and WebM. So, you know, I mean, the answer, so Google Plus is never going to be at the forefront of open protocols and open APIs because it's not in their nature. They want to keep things under tight control because what they saw happening at some of the other social networks around API rights, on Twitter, on Facebook, and the rest, was that there was a huge pollution of the stream that both drove people away from activity online, but also acted as a spoiler for the stream. And it's a place where the most fun happens, right? So, and also I think it's eventually where people will monetize these things. And you've seen Facebook try to do this. I think that if you have basically programs monetizing your stream for you, that's a problem for these social networks. But that said, I'm not really into social networks, so I'm kind of the wrong guy to ask. I use Twitter just like so I can yammer at the world, and I don't really care how people talk back to me. Probably shouldn't admit that. Your question's good, though.
The concern is really that people...
So I think that, so I guess what I'm trying to say is when they created Google+, they were always extremely cognizant of what Farmville did to the stream, you know, over at Facebook, and what a lot of these programs have done to Twitter's interactions. A lot of people, when they use Twitter heavily, it's really a broadcast mechanism for them, and they don't really pay much attention to the people who are sending them emails. I mean, I block a ton of people, and not because they're bad, but because they're not people, you know. And Twitter knows this, and they've tried to put limits on their APIs. And we also know that changing your API after the fact is a very easy way of alienating developers. We've seen this. We've done it when we've made mistakes, right? So I kind of agree with a conservative approach to APIs, but I wish they had more open protocols. So.
What I wanted to say was that the concern is really that, okay, there's the social thing that you don't want to be polluted, but more and more services from Google look to be related to this ecosystem of Google+. And so, like you told us, maybe they are really intricate with the core of Google backends, but there is a real concern that more and more things will become closed and not open source, and even worse,
I think it's
maybe
worth
not
measuring
open
that. I mean, so if you think about Google, okay, so we've released a lot of things like Android and Chrome, and you know, tons of software, literally over 3,000 projects. That's great. We never released search. You know, our search indexers, crawlers, and the rest. We have never released a lot of backends, a lot of backend technology. And what ends up happening is the opportunity for open sourcing things that are really big, like Android and Chrome, it comes at a cost at Google, because you can't end up using some of these non-open source things in the product, to the point where, for instance, in Android, Android can't take advantage of a lot of the developer infrastructure that we've made for normal Google development. So we ended up writing new things like Garrett and the rest, right? So it's problematic. The thing is, though, you shouldn't think of Google as an all open source company. We're not. You know, we never have been all open source. When I got at Google, we just had some patches that had gone out from time to time, and a couple of small examples. So I see it as sort of like over time, we've released a lot of software. And that's a net good, but I would never characterize Google as an open source company like, say, Red Hat is. So that's okay from my perspective. But, you know, I'd hate to disappoint you, but I would only say that, you know, while Google has done a lot of good for open source, we also have closed source software, and that will probably always be true. So independent of the influence of any one product or another. So.
Okay, just before the last question, I have one question for the attendants. Is Pierre Fischer?
Where's your open source software? No.
Is Pierre Fischer here? Pierre, I know that you have one question to ask.
Is it his birthday?
I want you to ask it.
Hi. I have a question about the problem between Android and the main developer called GBQ.
GBQ, yeah.
And as far as I know, it was during my holidays, so I just take a look at as a story. But he left the Android project because of problems with proprietary drivers.
Mm-hmm.
So what you think about it? And
so JBQ is a friend of mine, and I was very sad to see him quit the AOSP. That was very too bad. So yeah, so the problem is when somebody has left the company, I'm under very specific rules on what I can and can't say. So I'll just say this. That job is very, very hard. It's very stressful. Working with so many providers of chips and chipsets and handsets and the rest to try to get buildable AOSP out with every iteration of the operating system. It's a very hard job. I've done jobs like that in my dusty past. I've helped out with Android, but you know, I've done this job a long time. I started doing that very specific kind of job in 1997, I guess was the first time I had to do that kind of thing. And it's really stressful. And I think that you actually get burned out on it. It's very hard to maintain after about 3 or 4 years. So he lasted a little longer than I did in that kind of role. So he's a better man than me. But I have a lot of sympathy for that job. That said, we have new people to burn out in that project. So I'm not worried about the future of Android's open source project and the buildable sets of drivers you need to ship. What I want to focus on, and I'm trying to use JBQ's leaving as an object lesson, that we should be pushing harder to get more open source drivers out of manufacturers early on, because we can use that as the basis for future drivers of the sort. And I think we lost sight of that a little bit. It wasn't wrong for him to want binary drivers so that we can build AOSP. That's absolutely the right thing to do. But I really want to see if I can move some people into the role of writing those drivers as open source code, or taking the proprietary code from the manufacturers and having us open source it for them, if that's what they want. Because then that would be the right basis for future drivers as well. Because one of the things we see, and we've seen since the G1, for instance, people keep on rewriting calibration routines. Even though we write them for them and open source them and all the rest, it's like, I have this latent hope that one day they will say, you know what, a calibration routine for my compass is not the most important thing to make proprietary. And it's like, we're still going to be able to sell compasses. It's like, yes, you will. Just so it's a very frustrating job. JBQ did a very good job for many years. I wish he was still doing it, but he's not, and that's too bad. He's my friend. I miss him. So.
Okay, really thank you for your response. That's really interesting. We have one last, and that's a really last question for you.
Thank you.
And then we will eat.
Thank you very much. My question is a bit simple. So it was a global concern about APIs. I just wanted to know if there's policies for security management.
Sure.
And so what? What more?
Let me open this can of worms for you. So there's a lot of policies around security management. I mean, we do a lot of stuff. One, we try to rely on the user to shoot themselves in the feet with untrusted sources, which is a very controversial decision. So the root of security problems on Android, it comes down to, and I'm not trying to blame the user here. It might sound like that, but I'm really not. We give the user a lot of flexibility, and sometimes users do things that they shouldn't do. Whether it's visit that Russian APK site, which is a totally awesome thing to do. And then they get infected with malware and things that dial funny numbers and watch their passwords. And then you couple that with an industry, the security industry in the computer business. They like lying. They're saying, there's 10 million pieces of malware infecting hundreds of millions of phones. And I sort of famously, for a small value of the word famous, called these people charlatans and scammers. You might remember this article. And the reason I said that was because I had read an article. I was reading an article in Wired. I turned the page and I saw an advertisement from a security firm saying there are 10 million infected phones. And I knew this to be false. And it said, and there are 100,000. They had like a ridiculous number in there of the number of infected applications out there. And when you actually call them out and tell them they're lying, they say, no, we found these on these Chinese and Russian piracy sites. I'm like, oh, okay, so what you're saying is that I would have to go in, turn off unknown sources, go to the Russian malware site, download the application, and install it on my machine. Yes, that's right. And what was I supposed to do about this as an operating system vendor? Oh, nothing. We have software that will solve this problem. And it's like, yeah, sure you do. And you say, so you would be able to catch every single one of those. Well, no, but we will be able to figure it out later. And it's like, so what do people get out of your software exactly? And so when I look at the security things that we do, I'm very proud of what we do. So in response to users wanting to do deeply stupid things, like visit malware sites and piracy sites and basically saying, in return for pornography, I will install whatever on my phone. And it's like, why are you doing this? You know, we instituted the malware scanning stuff, where basically we find the malware for you on the internet. And we look for those packages to be installed, even if it's unknown sources and you're sideloading them, right? So we're trying to find that kind of malware for you, not just in the Play Store, but if you allow it for other applications you might load in the latest versions of Android. So there's that, which I thought was a very nice thing for us to do. And there's a part of me that's like, if they go to a Russian malware site, they deserve it, you know, which is not very nice of me to say. And then, you know, every once in a while, an application will hit the Play Store that is malware, and we don't catch it immediately. And once we do figure it out, we pull it back from the store and from the people who've installed it. And those are the tragedies in my mind. And we've gotten better about catching them, but every once in a while, that's going to happen. And then we had the problem with the key, the signing key issue earlier this year, which was actually, in my mind, a non-problem, because you had to basically install a piece of malware that would infect the key that would allow you to install another piece of software. And so it actually didn't affect people, but it was good that we heard about it and fixed it. So, you know. So on one side, I think it's really a shame how people try to use fear to drive this conversation, and they say outright lies about Android, which I think is a really nice thing. And they try to paint Android with this brush of being an insecure operating system. And at the other side of it, we give people a lot of flexibility, and sometimes they use that flexibility to do dumb things. And so does that mean we should take the flexibility away? Well, it's very hard to take the flexibility away in a truly open operating system and one with our attitude. So we're stuck in between sometimes. So that said, the security team's very, very strong. So.
Thank you again. Really. Yeah. You both really deserve the applause. So thank you, really.
Well, that's they were clapping for you.
Huh? Yeah. Oh, I don't think so. So now it's finished. Not really, but
really?
Just almost.
It's like,
because that's the time when we will eat.
Oh yeah, you should.
So you have pizzas and drinks and beers and cacahuete.